Hey guys, my name is Matimio, and welcome to another episode of Sunday Mailbox. This is a video series where you, the viewer, can submit your gaming or Battlefield-related questions, and then I will give my humble opinion on them. Now, to get the formalities out of the way real quick, if you would like to submit your own question that could be featured in an upcoming episode, you can do so by leaving a comment down below, or by sending me a YouTube message. The first question for today is, with CTE servers testing some redesigned rush maps in Battlefield 4, I was wondering what your thoughts were on having MCOM randomization. Essentially, the MCOMs would spawn anywhere within a defined bubble or radius, creating a varied experience each round, even on the same map. Perhaps something we could see in a future title. Well, this would definitely make things more interesting, and you're absolutely right. Every single round would be different, and it would make the games more varied. But I'm not exactly sure that's what you want to do for a game mode like Rush. We already have the problem right now with Rush where the MCOM placement doesn't make a lot of sense on a lot of these maps, and getting towards those MCOMs can almost feel impossible. Silk Road comes to mind. Like, there are a lot of maps right now that need a lot of work, and to DICE's credit, they're finally getting around to it, and I'm hoping, crossing my fingers, that the adjustments that they're making to it is gonna put Rush in the running for an actual and acceptable game mode now. But if you made it so that it was randomized, or at least somewhat randomized, where it was in a bubble, or it could be, you know, in a location within a bubble, you run into the problem, once again, where there's going to be some locations that are going to be great. It's going to make sense for the map, but there's also going to be some locations that don't make any sense at all, and it's going to make it even harder for the offensive team to push up onto the objective and capture the base, or even make it even impossible for the defensive team to defend said objective. You always have to remember, when you're thinking of these design concepts, while I love how you're thinking outside the box, you always have to remember, how is this going to impact the gameplay, and is it going to make things more enjoyable? Will it make it more difficult for the offense and defensive team to have a fun round when they're playing Rush? Is it going to make it more difficult for, you know, DICE or the developer to create a balanced gameplay experience? And if there's too many variables, especially for a game mode where you want things to be consistent and you want things to be well balanced, if the variety doesn't really enhance the gameplay, then you probably shouldn't be going down or really trying to implement a system like that. The next question comes from the Tickler, and it is, what do you think of the police force having spike strips in Battlefield Hardline? I think it will make the police have to think ahead of the robbers to stop them from stealing the cash in the new heist game mode. What are your thoughts? This is actually a really cool idea, and what I love about it is that it fits with the theme of cops versus criminals. I've already made it abundantly clear that I'm not a huge fan of the way that the class dynamic worked in Battlefield Hardline, because the engineer class, while it makes sense in the current Battlefield titles because you have tanks, you have helicopters to deal with, in Battlefield Hardline, the engineer, really all they were good for was taking out the Bearcat, and honestly, it also didn't really make a whole lot of sense that they had RPGs. Like, what cop is going to be using an RPG to take out a vehicle in the middle of a city? Like, you're not going to see that. But what you would see is a cop laying down one of these strips to deter vehicles from driving over it, or if they do drive over it, disabling the vehicle. And so if it was added into Battlefield Hardline, I don't think it would take out, you know, a vehicle instantaneously like the mines would in the current, you know, in the current Battlefield title. But if they ran over it, maybe it would disable it. Maybe it would disable it permanently unless an engineer jumps out and repairs the vehicle to 100% health. Then I could see that being an amazing addition into the game, because not only would it just be great for stopping vehicles from getting from one objective to the other, but it would also put a larger emphasis on the engineer class. Not only did the engineer class not make a lick of sense in the beta, but it also wasn't played all that often because the weapons on it sucked, like the primary weapon sucked, but the only reason to use the RPG was to take out the Bearcat. Like, you could take out any vehicle in the game, like a civilian vehicle, with one round of your magazine with your primary weapon. So there was really no reason to run with the engineer unless you were getting stomped by one of the Bearcat or one of the, you know, one of the heavily armored vehicles. And so if you did add in these road strips and you gave it to the engineer class, not only would it fit thematically and make sense thematically, but it would also expand the usefulness of the engineer. They could use it defensively, they could place it down on the field, but also if you were on the receiving end of it and you're in a car that runs over one of these strips and it becomes disabled, then your repair tool becomes a lot more useful, because if you don't repair it to 100% health, or you don't get it out of the disable zone, you're not going to be moving very quickly, and if any enemy is looking at you, you're going to be pretty exposed. And so yeah, I love this idea as long as it's implemented correctly, as long as Visceral Games is able to balance it out and not make it ridiculous. You'd also have to think about how would you eliminate it from the battlefield. Could an enemy just roll on over to one of these strips and reel it in or disable it? You know, does it have a one-time use? Is it good for the entire round? You probably don't want it to be good for the entire round, because then the entire map would probably be filled with like 5,000 different strips. That probably isn't the gameplay that we're looking for. But like I said, as long as it's well balanced, as long as it makes sense, I think it would be an awesome addition into Battlefield Hardline. The next question is, do you think that DICE should go back to the Bad Company 2 class setups, medics is LMGs and assault is ammo? I feel this really helped balance out the classes, and I was wondering if you agree. Yeah, I would agree with you. I felt like the class balance in Bad Company 2 made a lot more sense in that game. I felt like each class felt a lot more unique. I felt like each class had its strengths and weaknesses, and while that's still true for Battlefield 4, and I think that DICE did a much better job in Battlefield 4 at balancing out all the classes and making them feel powerful, I think that in Bad Company 2, it was a little bit better. And the reason why I say this is because if you were playing as the assault class back in Bad Company 2, you were using the assault rifles, which were arguably some of the best weapons in the game. You didn't have access to the med bags. You didn't have a defibrillator, and if you wanted to get your health back quickly, you needed to rely on your teammates. You had to rely on some teamwork there. And so if you wanted to have access to one of the best weapons in the game, you also wouldn't have access to arguably one of the best gadgets in the game, allowing you to regenerate your own health, making you essentially a one-man army. In the current Battlefield titles, you guys know the assault class is amazing. Like, being able to use the best weapons in the game, some of the most accurate, some of the hardest-hitting weapons in the game, but also having access to a med bag that allows you to regenerate your health and get back into the action very quickly, seems like an overpowered combination. And back in Battlefield 3, it absolutely was overpowered. Like, the medic in Battlefield 3 was the most popular, everyone ran it, and while sure, people would every once in a while switch on over to the support class or the recon and the engineer if there was a tank that rolled on by, but if you're playing on a heavily infantry-focused map, everyone was playing as the assault class because it made sense. Like, if you wanted to be good and you wanted to do well, the assault class was the way to go about it. But if you had it so that the medics didn't have access to the assault rifles and they were using light machine guns, granted, back in Bad Company 2, the light machine guns were fantastic. They were, I would say, better than the light machine guns in the modern Battlefield titles, but still weren't as good as the assault rifles, then you have to rely more on the teamwork dynamic between assaults and the medics. There were still problems in the game. I didn't like how, if you're playing as the assault, you also had access to the M320, so you basically had unlimited grenade spam and unlimited M320 spam. So that was one issue with the Bad Company 2 system, but the sheer fact that you just didn't give the best weapons and also arguably the best gadget in the game to the same class in Bad Company 2, in my opinion, it just made for a better balanced class system. I do know that back in Battlefield 3, DICE did say that they wanted to give the med bag and the defibrillator to the assault class because assault rifles and assault players would be on the front lines, and that made sense in their mind because they wanted people who were on the front lines to be giving people health. But that really wasn't a problem back in Bad Company 2 because even if you were playing with the light machine guns, you were still on the front lines. It wasn't like you were just bipoded up 1,000 meters away. Like, you were still up with all the assault players. And so I guess I can see the argument, but I still feel like overall the class dynamic and the class system was just better back in Bad Company 2. The next question comes from Joseph, and it is, what do you think of there being a different set of weapons for each team in Battlefield Hardline? Even if they have the exact same stats but different skins and looks, I think this would bring a great deal amount of diversity in weapons and realism. I played the beta and thought, why is a thief using a G36C and the police officer using an AKM? I think that in a full game, they should change faction weapons just to be different. Actually, I think that they should take it one step further and not only have faction-specific weapons that not only look differently, but perform differently. Recently, I've been playing a hell of a lot of Counter-Strike Go, and while I'm terrible at the game, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. One of the features I love about the title is that some of the guns are faction specific. If you're playing as the terrorist, you have access to the AK-47. If you're playing as the counter-terrorist, you can use the M4. And initially, I assumed that they were the same gun, but they just had a different skin on them. But that's not the case. They have a different recoil pattern, they hit harder, some hit harder than the others, and they also have a different rounds per minute. And because of that, when you're playing as a different faction, they're both amazing, they're both some of the best guns in the game, but it gives you that variety when you're playing as the two different factions. And so personally, if Counter-Strike Go can make this work, being one of the most competitive first-person shooters on the market, if they can make it well balanced, there's really no excuse for Battlefield Hardline not to try a system like this. They don't need to have every single gun be faction specific, but if there was just one or two for each of, for each cops and criminals, if there was just that unique difference, I think that would be amazing. It would have a little bit more variety in the game. It would make sense because, cops versus criminals, they're going to be using different weapons, and I just think that it would be a great addition in the game. So I think that this is a solid suggestion. But that's about it for today's Sunday Mailbox, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Once again, if you would like to submit your own question that could be featured in an upcoming episode, you can do so by leaving a comment down below or by sending me a YouTube message. But until tomorrow, guys, have a good one and take it easy.